Hey guys, welcome to Conversations with John Thomas. I'm here with my friend Michael French. I've known Michael for a number of years, since 2004, I think is when we first met. So almost 15 years now. We're getting up on 15 years. And Michael's been around streams for a long time. And so some of you, if you've been around streams, you may have heard his name. If you haven't, I just want to take a moment to introduce you guys and get to know a little bit about who Michael is, what you're doing, what's been going on. So you met John Paul back in the 80s. Is that correct?
Yeah, we met John Paul, I guess it would have been around 85, something like that. A long time. Before I got married, I met John Paul. So I always gauge it from that. I got married in 88, so probably about 85.
Okay.
So,
and now you're just telling me a funny story about John Paul breaking some rules.
Yeah, if you knew John Paul, one of his standards was you never prophesy marriages, you never prophesy babies, things like that. And so I was not I'd known John Paul for 2 or 3 years already. So he knew me as well, because he would come and speak at my dad's place where my dad was ministering and stuff. And he was speaking at a big conference, and I was probably not in the best spiritual place. Was dating someone, they may see this, so I'll be careful. I was dating someone that was not the best decision probably for either of us, put it that way. And had been involved in that relationship for a while, and went into a conference, and I knew I was not probably supposed to be in this relationship. So I was a little nervous because, everybody thinks John Paul is going to know everything about you, right? So we sat in the back, and I sat way in the back behind a column, and we'd not been going long into the ministry time when he says, "Michael French, where are you? I saw you somewhere." Not what I wanted to hear. He did it very kindly, but he stood me up. And this young lady sitting next to me, and he stood me up, and he proceeded to describe in some detail who my wife was and what she looked like and what she would be like. None of which fit the young lady who was sitting next to me. And I was not the only one who caught on to that. She caught on as well. So she was not a John Paul fan for a while. So much to the happiness of my wife, who I would meet soon after that, and we broke up with the young lady I was with, and the next day, actually, it went pretty quick. And I always remember, I used to give John Paul such a hard time because he always said, "Don't prophesy marriages and babies." And yet, had he not done that, my life probably would have been quite different. It was really a major turning point for me, and both in being grateful for hearing from God and in guarding my own life from there forward. So nobody else had to tell me some of those things, or at least hopefully not too often.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. So you were one of the first. Now, when we started, I think it was like 2005, 2006. We started training centers, which would be kind of centers to teach the streams courses, Art of Hearing God, Understanding Dreams and Visions, Advanced Workshop Dreams and Visions, in different places in the United States, around the world. So you were one of those. I was one of those, and that's where we kind of started to really more work together.
Right.
I think a little bit. And you were at the time pastoring a church that around the same time had become one of the bridge churches.
That's right. Yeah, we'd been through some major upheaval as a church, and needed some connections, and became a part of Bridge. Basically, some of my leaders didn't know John Paul that well, but it was one of those times when, out of relationship, I called him and said, "We're dying here," and he said, "I'll be there next weekend."
Wow.
And which totally blew me away, because I said, "Oh, you don't understand. I don't have any money. I can't. We're dying. I don't have money. I can't fly you down." He said, "I didn't ask you where you buy me a ticket or a hotel." I said, "I'll be there next weekend." And that's how we became part of the Bridge churches. So we had we had the relationship, and we're building that relationship with teaching and training center. But as a church, it came out of that love and that just compassion for who we were as a ministry that John Paul poured in that weekend. It was amazing. So
that's so cool.
Yeah,
that's So cool. Now, for those of you that are familiar, Bridge Church is a series of, well, not a series, but a group of churches. I guess that's a good, better word.
Yeah,
A group of churches that had gotten together that were, being overseen by John Paul. And John Paul was led to step out of being in that place of leadership there. And the Bridge churches kind of each went in different directions. But out of that, you had a couple different things that happened. I can actually remember being in the old facility on Lakeside Parkway, and we were in a meeting, and we're sitting at a table during one of the lunches, and you come up to John Paul, and like, John Paul, I think that the Bridge churches aren't going to make it. I want your blessing to start something new. And so that was
probably a profound moment for me, because it's really hard when your spiritual father, your mentor, is giving up something and you don't know, is this something I'm supposed to pick up? Is this something I'm supposed to do? How do you present this to them? And so even asking that question was with fear and trepidation. But it was really amazing, because it was clear the transition was happening for John Paul. It was also clear that some of the leadership structure that was sort of trying to keep that group alive was probably not going to continue on either. And I'll never forget that day. And I think about you being there. There were 2 or 3 other people that were there that day, sitting at that table, and the never having a clue that what was about to happen was to take something that my spiritual father's vision was for, but the Lord, circumstances, whatever, didn't allow to develop in the way maybe that people had envisioned it, and begin what we call Patria Ministries now, which is the Greek word for family.
Yeah.
And see a family of ministries blossom out of that kept those Bridge churches that wanted to stay connected from becoming orphaned when that transition, that godly transition took place, but would have left some of them alone.
Yeah.
Seeing them not become alone, to stay together as family, and the growth that's come from them since, I would have never dreamed. And yet that's now predominantly what I do, is work with that.
With these churches. And a number of other churches that have joined as well.
Yeah, we started, Bridge probably, I don't know, had 40 ministries. And John Paul's vision was always pastors, itinerant ministers, and marketplace leaders coming together as family. Yeah. And probably had 40 or so of those different type ministries in Bridge at its height. And so of that, maybe half became a part of Patria and carried on. But we now have around 110 pastors, itinerant ministers, and marketplace leaders that are part of Patria. That's if you don't count the individual churches in our African. I helped plant churches in Africa for years. Yeah. Probably got about 120 of those alone that we just kind of count as one group. But big number of folks, and it's unbelievable to think about. Wow, how did we go from what the seed that was planted with Bridge that John Paul birthed into transition to Patria, and then people now who don't even know. I mean, it hurts me some way. Don't even know John Paul, never knew him, but are still benefiting from his DNA and his the values that he brought to the table.
Yeah. One of the things, and I'm drawing out some of the story. I mean, one, because I want people to get to know you, but also there's a principle here that I think is so key, because we'll often get called to start something, and then it ends, and we don't understand what happened. It's like, I thought that this was going to be that, and it never was. And there's that disappointment, almost that grieving that can happen sometimes. We don't always realize the fruit that's going to come afterwards, because John Paul didn't get to see the fullness of the fruit.
No, he didn't. But you know what? He didn't. What I loved about him is some people think of John Paul and put him up on this pedestal. Yeah. He was just a guy. Yeah. He had disappointments with Bridge not moving forward the same as any of us would.
Yeah.
The thing I loved, though, was what he instilled in us and in others, and he lived this out, was that he knew God had something coming out of it.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a problem letting go of one thing to move to something else.
Yes.
We struggle with that so much.
Yeah.
And even though there was disappointment and pain, I think, with what happened, he knew God had a plan with it. And even though he didn't see, he was scheduled, I think it was our fourth or fifth annual gathering of all these ministries to come together once a year just for fellowship. He was scheduled to be at our May event when he passed away in February. And it would have been the first time he had come and sort of stepped back in to see what God was doing with it. He kept in touch with it, but just being there. He didn't want something else to be built on his name or his reputation. He wanted God to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is probably one of the most valuable lessons that I learned just from watching John Paul and being around streams. He had this ability. God could say something and he would hear what he heard of what God said. And this would be his own words, right? And he would pursue that to be faithful. And he'd find out, okay, so I heard wrong. That's not actually what it was. And he would just let it go. And ego didn't get in the way.
It didn't.
He would let something die because he realized, no, actually, this is what God was saying. And new information, and I'm moving because I will not get stuck with what God did. I've got to go where God is going.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember, but the other thing I love about it is he could hear that from other people too.
Yes.
He didn't have to hear directly God say, you blew it. He could hear other people correct him.
Yeah.
Because Bridges, I don't know if you remember, but with Bridge, it was actually, I believe it was Bob Jones that had a dream and told him you're hitched to a trailer that's slowing you down.
Yes.
And you need to unhitch from that trailer.
Yeah.
And he did.
Yeah.
He didn't get mad because Bob, said there's something that you need to change. He sought the Lord, figured out what the trailer was, and unhitched from it.
And unhitched. And then he took off.
Yeah.
Exactly what was said is exactly what happened.
Yeah.
That's an amazing thing. It's so good. There's such an inheritance. Yeah. So, well, guys, thanks for joining us for this conversations. This is a shorter episode. We're going to be doing another one, so keep an eye out for the next time you see Michael French on Conversations. We've got some other things to talk about, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Michael, thanks.
Amen. Good to be here.
Yeah. Awesome.